Chapter 13. The trio stared down a dark hallway. It was unlit save for one source of light at the very end, where there appeared to be an entryway that led off to the right. The large metal door shut behind them with an ominous clang. Barry whimpered. "Come on," whispered Petrick, and he started forward. The other two trotted after him. Barry grabbed for Susie's hand in the dark. She slapped him away at first, but after his second attempt, she grabbed him and squeezed reassuringly. Sometimes that's what you do for a friend. Clark, meanwhile, trotted merrily next to Petrick without a care in the world. He certainly seemed at home. As they approached the light at the end of the hallway, Petrick pointed excitedly. "Guys, look," he said. "That's an electrical light up there. It's not a lantern." Susie and Barry looked, and indeed, Petrick was right. There was no open flame to behold in this light. It glowed without combustion, and Petrick pointed his finger along the wall near the light where they could see wires fastened and leading away. "It's like my torchless," Barry said. He patted his pack, where he knew it was nestled safely. "What is this place?" Petrick wondered aloud. They reached the end of the hallway and turned right through the opening into a vast, dark room. Immediately visible in the center of the space, there was a rather large open circular area, a dais, with a single pinpoint of bright moonlight shining down in the middle. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, the children began to make out shrouded shapes all around the dais. They were too numerous to count. Drawn instinctively, they crept slowly toward the dais. Clark continued to trot along happily, sniffing things here and there, perfectly comfortable in their new surroundings. Petrick's heart was pounding, as were Barry and Susie's. There was, as yet, no hint of any electrical power on display in this large room. That is, until Petrick took his first step into the open center. There was a loud, deep rumble, and everyone froze in their tracks. A brilliant blue light flashed above them and blinded them. A tight horizontal line of light found the top of Petrick's head and then slowly scanned down the length of his body. "Petrick?" said Susie, worried, as the light traced down her body as well. "Just stay still," he instructed. I think it's trying to figure out who we are." The blue beam of light reached the tips of Petrick's slippers, and just as abruptly as it had turned on, it was suddenly gone. "Well," Susie was going to say the requisite "now what?" but the entire room sprang into life before she could finish. Bright lights directly above them clicked on, again dazing the three of them. They could hear loud fans starting to blow, and warm air wafted down from the ceiling, stirring up thick layers of dust. More lights flickered on behind, to the left of and to the right of the dais. As their vision normalized in the new light, they began to take in the enormity of the massive room. It went on for hundreds of feet in every direction, except the one they'd entered from. Under various odd-shaped shrouds around them, things started humming to life with beeps, lights, clicks, and chirps. Petrick could see workbenches with tools, shelves with unfamiliar gadgets and books, and paper sketches littering every horizontal surface in sight. It was all completely overwhelming and all utterly magical. "What?" asked Barry breathlessly. "It's like the treasure shed," Susie said. "But way bigger," Barry finished. He blinked, and Susie rubbed her eyes, trying to comprehend this sudden flood of the unfamiliar and strange assaulting their senses. Petrick felt an incredible warmth welling inside his chest as he took it all in. "I think it's a workshop," he said. "I believe it's my father's workshop." The other two stopped their own gaping to give Petrick a look that said, "Are you crazy?" "No, seriously," he said, running over to one of the workbenches. "Look, this is the same kind of saucer that we built together from the junk shed for choosing day." He held up an admittedly similar-looking saucer. Its resemblance was uncanny, in fact. "My dad taught me how to make this. And look, these are the automatic shears that we made 2 summers ago that almost cut off Mistress Frizz's fingers." He grabbed a dangerous-looking pair of oversized scissors that began to chomp on their own with the click of a button. In hindsight, that particular adventure had been destined to fail miserably from the get-go. "I don't think we should be here," said Barry. He was looking away from the center of the room, wide-eyed. "Barry might be right," said Susie. "We're not supposed to be around all this technology," Petrick said, wholly undeterred. "Come on, you said it yourself. It's just like the treasure shed, except—" He flung off a dusty canvas covering with a flourish. His hands trembled at what was underneath. "Except this is real. Guys!" He turned back to face his uneasy friends. "This is my father's workshop. This is his blackboard, the one I see every night when I dream of him." Susie stepped forward tentatively and scrutinized it. "It looks so old," she said. Petrick ran a finger along the chalk tray. "It's real," he said. His smile stretched from ear to ear. "I always knew it was." That was when they heard a voice. "I don't know who you think you are," it shrilled. It was coming toward them from behind several of the shrouded piles. "But put everything down immediately. This is a private facility. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Susie tugged at Petrick, trying to indicate that they should run and hide, but he waved her off and craned his neck to try and see who was walking toward them. For the briefest of moments, when he'd first heard the voice calling to them, his heart had skipped a beat, thinking it might actually be his father. But no, this voice was different entirely. It had an odd lilt to it. It was higher pitched, and there was something that Petrick couldn't quite put his finger on. Was it fear? Through cracks of visibility between the covered shelves and mounds of unknown machinery, Petrick could see a shuffling figure in slivers and flashes. "You'll find nothing here of value," the voice called again. "Please, leave immediately." "We should go," Barry rasped, "before he sees us." Petrick held fast. Clark barked at that statement and began to wag his tail. He barked again as a figure emerged from one of the long rows, still in shadow. "Now, who is that?" the figure said. It stepped forward with a distinct shuffle. The darkness receded from the figure as he, and it was a he, stepped into the light of the central dais. Clark let out another excited bark and ran at full speed toward him. He was tall, and he was wearing an odd set of tailored clothing in a style unlike anything the children had ever seen worn on Indikar. But it was his skin and his eyes that were by far the most striking. His skin was a lustrous, sparkling blue-white, and his eyes were a bright turquoise. They seemed to shine with a soft glow. Petrick didn't understand how he hadn't seen them piercing through the darkness. The odd man, if he was a man, stooped as Clark rushed up to meet him and caressed his face as the small fluffball licked his nose and cheeks furiously in happy greeting. "Clark," said the man, "what in the stars are you doing here?" "You know my dog?" said Petrick, getting the man's attention. "Your dog?" The man rose and regarded Petrick with renewed scrutiny. Barry and Susie warily closed ranks behind him. The man took a step toward them, and they instinctively each took the same step backward. "Your dog?" the man repeated. "And you haven't stolen him?" "He's had Clark his whole life, mister," Susie said. "Then you must be—" The man shook his head as if he didn't trust his own reasoning. "Petrick?" He knew his name. He knew Petrick's name. "Who are you?" Susie demanded, filling the void for Petrick's racing mind. "My name is Habersham Cornelius Franklin Windsor III, he said in his strange clipped accent as he puffed his chest out proudly. He then leveled his eyes back on Petrick. "But you may call me Haber, and I will call you young master." "You know my father," Petrick blurted out. "Of course I do," Haber responded. "Your father made me." "What is this place?" Susie demanded. I don't answer to strangers, young lady," Haber responded dourly. "Her name is Susie, Mr. Habershaw Cornell," said Petrick, struggling with the new man's name. "Haber, young master. Just call me Haber." Petrick nodded. She's one of my best friends in the world, he said. Haber walked towards the trio, and as he got closer, they realized how tall he actually was. Haber was taller than anyone they'd ever met on Indikar, perhaps 7.5 feet tall. Susie tensed as he moved toward her, but he merely stuck his hand out in greeting. A friend of the young master's is a friend of mine, he said, though his eyes were narrowed skeptically. Susie shook his hand, but then withdrew it in surprise. Your hand is so cold, she said. It will warm as my circuits heat up, he replied, nodding. Recovery from hibernation is not instantaneous, after all. Petrick stepped forward and took Haber's large, shimmering hand in his own, and looked at it with wide eyes. You're a robot, he said. An inelegant term, chided Haber. I'm an autonomous synthetic androidus. A robot? Barry repeated. His eyes were wide and his face was colorless. What's that? A machine, Petrick exclaimed, circling the android, touching his sharp-fitting clothes, feeling his long, sinewy, strong arms, and gazing at the minute, shiny flecks of pale blue that glistened in his pearl-white skin. Barry and Susie were backing away from him, unable to look away. Petrick noticed and waved them back closer reassuringly. It's okay, guys. He's no more dangerous than any of the machines I've ever made. His friends looked at him like he was crazy. Okay, no more dangerous than the safe ones, like Barry's Torchless. He's not evil. They stopped backing up, but they didn't move forward. Haber grunted a little impatiently. Of course I'm not. Now, where is Master Fenton? Where is your father? That elicited a blank look from Petrick. I thought he would be with you. Now it was Haber's turn to look confused. Master Fenton did not bring you here? Petrick shook his head. We had to break in, Susie clarified hoarsely. Haber took a step back and another long look at the boy in front of him. How long have I been in hibernation? He asked. Judging from your speech patterns, growth, and what I know of your genetic makeup, you must be how old now? 10? 11 seasons, Petrick said, correcting him. 11 years, Haber said, and then he sat down straight onto the ground like a giant folding grasshopper. Oh my. Do you know where my father is? Petrick asked. The android took a long time to answer. I'm afraid I don't, young master, he said. 11 years. It was not supposed to happen this way. Where did his father go? Barry asked. His curiosity was also starting to get the better of him. This is my other best friend in the world, Barry, Petrick said, gesturing to Barry by way of introduction. Susie's 11 like me, and he's 10. Haber nodded at the information and reached out to shake hands with Barry. Barry hesitated and looked at Petrick, who nodded. It's a pleasure, Master Barry, Haber said to him. They're not that cold, Barry observed as their hands made contact, giving Susie a reproachful look. Indeed, Haber nodded. My circuits are almost recovered from the hibernation cycle, and my internal diagnostics are nearly complete. To answer your question, Master Barry, Petrick's father, Master Fenton, departed Indikar almost exactly 11 years ago to the Outer Rim. The Outer Rim, Barry repeated, wide-eyed, with absolutely no idea what Haber was talking about. Yes, the Outer Rim. Why did he go out there? Susie asked. He was looking for Starstuff, interrupted Petrick. He was looking for Starstuff. Haber looked surprised. He nodded. That's right. You said it wasn't supposed to happen this way, Petrick prodded. You mean my father intended to come back for me? I helped him plan his initial route, young master, Haber answered. He was to be gone 4, maybe 5 years at the extreme. It was his idea to leave you with the Separatists while he was gone. Separatists? Asked Susie. The odd, simple people who raised you and put the silly thought in your head, child, that machines like me are evil, Haber replied. Odd and silly, but trustworthy. We don't call ourselves Separatists, said Barry. We're Indikarans. Indikar is my home, too, Haber scoffed. But I'm obviously not one of your people. They'd tear me apart for being what I am, wouldn't they? Most Indikarans aren't Separatists, or at least the Indikarans who are left. Left? Queried Petrick. What do you mean by that? You children have much to learn about the outside world. Then he turned to address Petrick. But first, I have a question for you, young master. If your father has not returned to reclaim you, how have you possibly found me here? Clark led us here, Petrick answered. He woke up barking like crazy tonight and bolted out here, so we followed. Really? Said Petrick, turning to the dog, who was lying patiently next to the four of them on his side. Now, why would you do that, Clark? I was actually right in the middle of one of my dreams with my dad. A scary one. Dreams? Haber was looking at Petrick very intently. What kind of dreams? Petrick described the nightly dreams he had of his father, and as he did, Haber's interest and excitement grew with every detail. Do you know what this means? Haber was practically levitating off the floor as Petrick finished. The android shouted to the ceiling, It actually worked! He scooped Clark up into his spindly arms and rushed over to one of the multitude of shrouded shapes all around them. What worked? Petrick called as the children followed after the suddenly crazed android. What are you doing with Clark, mister? Susie called in alarm. With a poof of dust, Haber flung aside the covering of one of the shrouded objects, revealing an examination table with wires, a harness that looked vaguely Clark-sized, and various panels for readouts. Hey, said Petrick, now behind Haber. He was desperately trying to peer around him to see what he's up to. What are you doing? We had high hopes, Haber said, ignoring the children's protests as he worked on clamping various wires to the dogs. But we weren't really sure if it was going to work. Haber flipped a switch, and the table sprang into life. Screens flickered on, and various other lights and humming wires woke slowly, not all at once. Hey! Petrick's tension ratcheted up a notch as Haber grabbed the scruff of Clark's neck and began prodding the dog's head. Stop! What are you doing to him? Stop it, Mr. Robot, right now! Susie shouted. Barry groaned and looked at the android hand he'd shaken. Oh, I never should have touched him. He is evil. I'm cursed now. Nonsense, Haber said, shushing them. It must be around here somewhere. He continued pressing on various parts of Clark's fluffy head. Ah, he said loudly, which made the children jump. Here we are. And that was when Clark's head cracked open. Chapter 14. The companion grunted in pain as Vice Purveyor Slink snapped their connecting tethering taut, using the cord as a means to drag the companion faster down the corridor. The gesture hurt Slink as well, of course, but he didn't mind the pain. They had business with the Master Purveyor, and they would get there ASAP, the companion's tiny legs be damned. It worked. The companion picked up its pace behind him. It was small, only coming up to Slink's chest, and clothed head to toe in a bulky white jumpsuit covered in wires and hoses, and a large white helmet with no visor. Were one unfamiliar with what a companion was, it would have been astonishing to see it walking down the corridor at all. Its entire face, eyes and all, was completely covered, but companions didn't see with their eyes. A turn in the corridor loomed, and voices echoed just beyond it, along with an irregular thumping sound. Slink tapped in a forecast request, using his wrist control without even thinking. He felt a twinge in the back of his neck where the tether to the companion entered him, and he glanced down at the small screen that was ever present in his right hand to get a forecast. 3 officers, mid-ranks, one tossing a dexterity ball against the wall. Names he didn't recognize. They would see him and tense. The last of the 3 would toss his ball against the wall and then freeze. The threat level was minimal, but Slink still tensed anyway. The thought that he should be safe at the heart of his own facility, surrounded by his own men, never entered Slink's mind. His companion kept him safe, nothing else. Slink turned the corner, and he observed with pleasure that the forecast had been perfect. 2 of the junior officers stopped talking when they looked over at him. The 3rd tossed his ball, saw Slink and the companion, and froze. It was written on their silent, wide faces. They were afraid of him, and it. Slink knew that everyone called his companions it. They didn't know what else to call them, given that their suits were so completely covering and obfuscating. Their large helmets and jumpsuits full of wires and tubes that made their forecasts possible also made it impossible to tell what their bodies looked like underneath, except, of course, that the companions were always small. The mystery surrounding Slink's companions added to their intimidation factor, and that suited Slink just fine. Slink held up his hand about shoulder height, palm open and up, as he approached the officers. The dexterity ball, a small, soft, elastic blue sphere that pilots used to keep their hands strong, bounced off the wall. It sailed past the third junior officer, who was staring unmoving at Slink, hit the wall on the other side of the corridor, bounced off the floor right in front of where Slink was walking, arced up, starting to slow, and then plopped down, right into Slink's open palm. He and his companion had never broken stride. The shocked looks on the faces of the junior officers made Slink smirk on the inside. They said, "So the stories are true. You can see into the future." "Apologies, Vice Purveyor," the third officer said with a tremble in his voice, and Slink swept past. Slink didn't answer, nor did he return the small blue ball. He reached back behind him with it and indicated through the telepathic link that the companion should take it. The companion did without a word. Only Slink knew they couldn't actually speak. Speech would undermine their focus on forecasting. After a series of additional corridors, blessedly empty, Slink arrived at his destination. Slink had been the right hand of the Master Purveyor for 3 generations. 3 generations of crisis, 3 generations that saw the rising dominance of the only force for order among the chaos, the authority on interstellar space travel. This Master Purveyor, in particular, had seen to that. The authority peddled the rarest, most important substance in the galaxy, Starstuff. When you're running out of the lifeblood of civilization, controlling what's left becomes the most important job in the universe. The Master Purveyor was the man for the job. The Master Purveyor was also a man not to be disturbed. Slink hesitated at the doorway to the Purveyor's holochamber, and his heart rate quickened. Unsure, he again lifted his small screen and checked for a forecast. The readout was flat. He looked in annoyance to see his companion standing listlessly. He'd been with this companion for only a month now. It couldn't possibly be going bad already. Another snap of the connection cord, a whimper of pain, and the readout blinked. 82% probability of success. Slink pressed on the door panel to announce himself. It slid open a moment later. Slink stepped inside, letting out some slack on the tether cord and empathically directing the companion to remain just outside the threshold. The Master Purveyor didn't like Slink bringing them in his chamber. "What is it, Slink?" a deep voice called out. Slink's eyes took a moment to adjust to the darkness of the chamber. As they did, pinpoints of light came into focus, suspended all around him. Then tiny clouds of color. The galaxy, in miniature holographic form, stretched seemingly out to infinity. A uniformed man sat cross-legged in the middle of it all, as if he were a ruling titan suspended amid his universe. The sharp triangle of light spilling into the chamber from the open door was a knife cutting into the otherwise perfect illusion. "We picked up the transmission," Slink said. The Master Purveyor waited for him to continue without moving. Slink licked his lips before speaking. "A transmission from inside the nest." The Master Purveyor had his eyes closed. He hadn't moved. "Verified?" he asked. "Of course. I would never have disturbed you otherwise." "I trust whoever intercepted this transmission has kept that discovery under wraps?" "They won't be sharing it with anyone else." "Where was it headed?" "Indukar." The Master Purveyor opened his eyes. Slink relaxed. The forecast had been correct. "Hop to it, then," the Master Purveyor said as he unfolded himself and stood among the stars like a giant. The authority emblem on his breast pocket gleamed. "You should be on your way." And that's the end of chapter 14. All right, you guys. Hopefully everyone could hear. Nice and easy. And that you're enjoying the story. Thanks for listening. We'll pick up again. Actually, I am going to take weekends off. So we'll pick up again on Monday. Hopefully that's just builds the anticipation for the next couple chapters. But yeah, we'll have to figure out what's going on with Clark and the fact that Haber, the android, has just cracked his head open. And what's going on with the Authority. The Authority is on their way to Indikar, which doesn't sound good. So awesome. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. And everybody's doing well and nice and healthy. And I hope you're enjoying the reading of Starstuff. I hope you're enjoying it. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will catch all of you people same time, same place, Monday. I'll see you at 5:30 Pacific. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye, guys.